Hey everyone, today I wanted to do a video about the newest handgun that I picked up, which is a Kimber Compact Custom. Now, this is by no means a new gun to the world, just new to me. This actually was one of the first handguns that I ever fired when I was growing up. This actually belonged to my oldest brother. I believe this is the first handgun he ever got. He just recently decided to get rid of it, so he floated the offer to me, and it really, for me, it was too good to pass up. So I went ahead, picked it up from him, and I've had it for a few months now. I've been shooting it like crazy, trying to get as good a testing as I can on it, testing it with different types of ammunition, different types of magazines, pretty much anything I could do to try to get some good talking points for this video. And I think at this point I am ready to give you my thoughts on it. Now obviously this doesn't have the full-length slide and it doesn't have the full-length grip, so this is geared towards concealed carry. I think that is the role that Kimber designed this handgun to fit into. But that being said, I don't think I will ever concealed carry it, and I'll discuss more about why towards the end of the video. But again, that is the role that I think this is designed for. Now as far as the things that come standard on it, as you can see, it does have these wood grips. When I picked it up from my brother, he had actually replaced them with Crimson Trace grips, but I'm not a huge fan of lasers, so I went ahead and swapped it out for the wood grips again. As you can see, it only has a safety on the one side, which doesn't bother me at all. I almost prefer a single-sided safety. There's no sort of accessories rail or anything like that. It has no barrel bushing, so the takedown is a little bit different than most full-size 1911s. But again, it's not a huge issue. And if you guys are curious as far as wanting a takedown video for one of these, just let me know and I'll go ahead and put one together for you guys. I'm not going to waste time in this video showing how to break one of these down. Moving on to some of the other features, as you can see, there is a skeletonized trigger here, more of a skeletonized hammer back here. The sights are the Kimber standard sights if you choose to swap them out. But as they come, it has a blacked out rear and a blacked out front. And I'll again talk about that a little bit more when I get to accuracy. But other than that, you know, it's a fairly standard 1911. Nothing too crazy. No real flared magazine well or anything else like that. It doesn't have really too many extra bells and whistles. And as you can see, it has an internal extractor for those of you who are interested in that aspect of it. So now that I've talked about the features a little bit, I want to talk to you a little bit about my personal opinions about this specific 1911. Now for me personally, I've owned only one 1911 previous to this one, and it was a Remington R1. Now when I bought that 1911, I spent days and days and days going to every gun store in the local area back when I was in North Carolina, handling every 1911 I could, trying to pick out the perfect one. And again, the one I eventually settled on was a GI style Remington R1. Now that 1911 served me perfectly. To my recollection, I never had a single malfunction with it. I didn't do any torturing with it, but it ate every type of ammunition that I fed it without any issues whatsoever. I could also use any mags that I wanted on it without any issues whatsoever. Now fast forward to about a year and a half ago, and there was, you know, some interesting things going on in the gun world, so I decided to trade that in for a Glock 21 so that I could have a little bit more capacity as far as 45 ACP goes. And I really liked my other Glock, so I figured I'd keep along with the manual of arms, so I picked up a Glock 21. Ever since I got rid of that Remington R1, I've kind of been jonesing for another 1911. However, I'd heard mixed things about Kimber. I know they used to be really great in the past, back when there was pretty much full custom 1911s. But from everything that I've heard and read recently, these things have at least Kimber has started to take that reputation for granted, and again, I've been hearing putting out substandard 1911s. So I never anticipated on buying a Kimber when I got another 1911. And then the other thing that I didn't want when I bought another 1911 was getting a non-full size. I feel like if you're going to get a 1911, you might as well get a full-size one. So this has two qualities that I never would have thought that I wanted in a 1911 when I picked up a second one. However, again, like I said, I was basically presented with an offer I couldn't refuse, so I went ahead and picked this one up. Now, one of the first things that kind of disappointed me about this handgun, and again, you know, even though it was one of the first handguns I ever fired, I didn't have much to compare it to back then. Now that I have a lot more experience with shooting handguns of different styles and different types, I have a little bit more snobbish tastes, I guess, when it comes to 1911s specifically. So one of the things that kind of surprised me was the quality of the trigger. Now, by no means is this a bad trigger, especially compared with a lot of striker-fired handguns or double-action, single-action handguns out there. However, for a 1911, it was actually a pretty heavy trigger. Now, I've measured this myself at right around 4¼ pounds, but I'll go ahead and test it here on camera for you so you guys can see for yourself. So I have a Wheeler trigger pull scale, nothing too fancy, but I'll go ahead and center that up on the trigger. And silly me, have to depress the beaver tail safety. Now, again, that's one thing I'm not a huge fan about on 1911s, and as you can tell, I forgot about it, so let's try this again. Alright, so what is that? Just under 4¼ pounds. Let's go ahead and try that again. So let me cycle the slide. Make sure that finger's out of the way. Try this again. And again, forgetting to depress the trigger, beaver tail safety. Alright, so that one was right at 4 pounds. Now, again, by no means is 4 pounds a bad trigger weight for a 1911. However, especially from a lot of the custom Kimbers I've seen out there, that is a fairly heavy trigger pull. I feel like it could be lighter, but that's just my taste. I know I can swap that out myself, but again, that's how it comes from the factory. The other thing I'm not huge on, and I know that I'm kind of different in this respect from a lot of 1911 shooters out there, I don't like fully blacked out sights. Now, my eyesight isn't the best, hence why I wear glasses, but I like having something that I can really have a hard focus on for that front sight, especially in low light to no light conditions. But as you can see here, the sight picture, I mean, it's black on black, and that doesn't do a whole lot for me. So that mixed with the little bit of a heavier, stiffer trigger pull, because again, to kind of describe what the trigger pull feels like, it's not as smooth or as crisp as a lot of 1911s that I felt out there. But again, by no means is it a bad trigger. Just, again, not the greatest one I've ever felt in a 1911. So again, between the trigger and between the sights, my accuracy has been okay with it. Now, I'm sure at this point I've already rolled in plenty of footage of me actually shooting this thing. But I'll go ahead and show you as best I can a target from doing some accuracy testing. Now, with the accuracy testing I did, I shot both freehand, just standing. I shot with the barrel or with the front of the gun supported on a rest, and then I also just did it with my hands on the rest. By far, my best shooting was just having my hands rested. And my best group, I believe I was shooting maybe PMC bronze at the time. Again, my best group, if I can get this in here, was this guy right here. As you can see, I have 3 shots basically through the same hole, and then I had 2 little flyers out to the side, which again I'm sure is me as opposed to it actually being the gun's fault for that. And just FYI, my point of aim was right here. So this was still pretty early on in my testing, when I was still getting used to the trigger, still getting used to pretty much everything about this gun. I'm sure that this gun can outshoot me. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. I would say most guns out there are more accurate than the people shooting them, and I know that is the case for this because obviously when I was getting my fundamentals right, I was able to more or less put it through the same hole. So again, no doubt that this thing is plenty accurate, especially considering it doesn't have the short barrel. It's better accuracy than I can ask for, I'll put it that way. So the trigger is uninspiring, the accuracy is phenomenal, but what about the reliability? That's one huge thing when it comes to 1911s is reliability. A lot of 1911s out there are very particular about what kind of ammo it'll feed reliably with, and due to a limited budget, I wasn't going to feed it, the top of the line ammo, so I was just going to feed it what I already had available to me, which was mostly PMC bronze, some Blazer brass, and then Herder's nylon jacketed aluminum cased ammo, which I've had sitting around forever that I don't really shoot, but I figured I'd see if it ran through this. And then I also had an assortment of magazines, everything from like one of the Wilson Combat 7-round mags that you see here, to, what is this one? This one is a Metgar magazine. I also had a Act Mag 8-round magazine. I had, what is this, a Chip McCormick magazine. I used like 4 or 5 different magazines, at least brands on this gun, with multiple of these Wilson Combat mags. And the reliability wasn't terrible. Now, right off the bat, when I picked this up for my brother, who, bless his heart, isn't around firearms as much as I am, I noticed that immediately when I was trying to cycle the slide, that the recoil spring seemed really off. It kept like binding on itself. Whenever I would lock the slide to the rear, if I wanted to release the slide, just taking the tension off wasn't enough to release the slide lock. I had to really wrench on it to actually get it to go forward. And it just didn't feel right, so I took it apart. I looked at the recoil spring, and I decided to swap out the recoil spring. Now, Kimber does recommend that you swap out the recoil spring every 800 rounds. According to my brother, by the time he was done with it, he figured it probably had close to 1,000 rounds through it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So I decided to go ahead and swap out the recoil spring. It wasn't very expensive. It actually shipped fairly quickly from Kimber. So I swapped that out, and that fixed a lot of the issues. Prior to swapping it out, I had a couple stovepipes, and then one really situation where, and I wish I'd had it on camera, where I was letting my buddy shoot it, who's a big 1911 guy. And when he fired it, the slide cycled to the rear, it hung up at the rear, and then went forward. It like hesitated at the fully rear position, and then it chambered the round, and then it was good to go. So it was like a delayed reaction kind of a thing. It still chambered the round, it still extracted the round that was in there, but there was a weird pause in there. I'd never seen that before, so that kind of caught me off guard, and that was like the big red flag to say, yeah, recoil spring needs to go. Now, since changing the recoil spring, I've only had one malfunction, and that was while I was shooting from the rest, so I should be able to, if I have the footage, I'll go ahead and roll that in. Now, that was probably my fault because the way I was holding it with my hands rested. It's very likely that there may have been some limp wristing involved, which could have not allowed the slide to cycle fully, which could have caused that stovepipe. So I don't want to necessarily 100% blame the gun, just kind of letting you know. And again, I'll roll in the footage if I can find it so you can judge that for yourself. The only other issue that I've had since swapping out that recoil spring was I let my boss shoot it, who's a big 1911 guy as well, and he had a bunch of the Wilson Combat 8-round magazines. The ones I've been using, by the way, are 7-round magazines. So he had a Wilson Combat 8-round magazine, at least I think he said it was Wilson Combat, and he inserted it while the slide was locked to the rear, and then he tried to chamber the round, and it kept getting hung up, and it wouldn't close the slide. And what had happened was the magazine had over-inserted, and the feed lips were actually getting in the way of letting the slide go all the way forward. So that's a really big thing to keep in mind. If you do have a smaller framed 1911, be very cautious with using longer magazines because it may over-insert and could potentially prevent you from being able to cycle the slide properly. Is that a huge issue? Not necessarily, but just something to keep in mind, something I figured I would let you guys know about to hopefully prevent you from having that issue on any of your 1911s or really any of your smaller handguns out there. So even with cheap ammunition, this thing cycled really well. And I'll show you some close-up footage of shooting. I think it's blazer brass, and then some nylon jacketed ammo, nylon jacket ammo with aluminum case. And then I also shot some Hornady critical defense ammo just to see if it would cycle the defense loads. Now with the critical defense, it does have a pretty rounded tip, so it's very similar to a full metal jacket. However, I will say my brother carried Federal Hydra-Shocks, and he seemed to have good feeding with these. So just letting you know that it does seem to feed these as well. I will say if you do get a handgun and you plan on carrying it, whatever defensive loads you plan on carrying, run that ammo through your gun. Even if it's worked in other people's guns, each gun is an individual. Run it through your gun, make sure it works, especially with guns like 1911s where they can be very, very ammo specific. So again, long story short, reliability wise, this has actually been very, very reliable for a 1911 through the 600 or 700 rounds that I've put through it in the couple months that I've had it. Now, to me, with the issues that I have had, it's to the point where, again, I don't necessarily want to carry it, but generally speaking, I'm not going to want to carry a 1911 myself anyway. So let's go ahead and talk about that aspect of it. Now, if I were to run a 7-round magazine, and for example, this is again Federal Hydra-Shocks. So a 7-round magazine of Federal Hydra-Shocks versus 16 rounds, including one in the chamber, on my Glock 19. These, even with my Glock 19, with the Inforce APL weapon light, these are pretty darn close to the same exact weight. So in my opinion, I am not going to carry literally half the amount of ammo for the same exact weight. Now, yes, the 1911 is a little bit slimmer. However, in my opinion, it's still pretty easy to conceal this 1911. That said, I'm 6'2", 220 pounds, so I do have a little bit more space to conceal. But for me, ammo capacity in 9mm is more important than the size of the 45. If I was having this discussion 20 years ago, by all means, 45 is a great fight-stopping round. However, with the advancements in ammunition technology out there, 9mm and 45 are pretty darn close to the same thing. So if I can carry twice the ammo in my Glock 19, I'm going to carry my Glock 19 every single time. Now, if you're a person who really wants to carry a 1911, then I can't fault you. They're a beautiful gun. John Moses Browning was an enormous genius, and he brought forth some of the greatest firearm designs ever, hence why his firearms are still being used by the military, to include the 1911, or at least its descendants. So if you are looking for a specific 1911 to carry, this isn't a bad option. Now, you will have to get it on the used market just because these are discontinued. But Kimber is making newer models that are pretty much the same dimensions here with the same features that you see here. So there are options out there if you don't want this specific style. Again, you can swap out any of the grips. I mean, 1911s are almost as customizable as anything else. Whatever safeties, triggers, hammers, whatever you want. All those options are available to you if you so choose. Now, if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and throw those in the comment section below. If you have any recommendations of 1911s that I should try out, please feel free to let me know. I'm always open to suggestions, and I do want to get another full-size 1911 at some point in the future, ideally something with an accessory rail. So if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know in the comments below. But as always, I hope you're able to get something out of this video, and I appreciate you watching.